Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is Red Lines, a show where we break the barriers of daring conversations and, eponymously, cross some red lines. Today I'm joined by Greg Terry and Paul Smith, and we're going to be discussing the recent fascist tendencies in Europe and, dare I say, the United States, and Biden's latest decisions to still not give Ukraine the capacity to long range strike Russia. Guys?
Hello, Yulia. Nice to see you again. And I'm wearing my red shirt for the red line.
Oh, nice. Well, Greg, could you tell us a few words about who you are and what you do?
Yes, I work in Ukraine. I've worked there for 26 years. And since the full scale invasion of this war, I have been partnering with different organizations throughout Ukraine to run aid. I mean, we began evacuating civilians, assisting refugees. The next thing you know, in addition to that, we're supporting our military friends that are spread across the entire front line. So it has moved to a multiplicity of things, continuing to aid civilians, continuing to aid medical, but at the same time, we are also assisting our military friends across the front line and doing the best we can to do our part for Ukrainian victory.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. And Paul?
My name is Paul Smith. I'm an American, U.S. Army vet, and a Ukrainian Army vet. I served in the 59th Brigade. Um, I lived in Ukraine since 2012. I first visited it in 2008. I've been preparing for war with Russia since even before Maidan. Um, I was before when I first went to Ukraine, I was kind of very pro-Russian, and that was just
Mm.
really due to a lot of ignorance I had, and a lot of the propaganda that Putin was doing in the early 2000s. And then when I got to Ukraine and learned about Ukraine's place in the Soviet Union, my ideas of Russia had changed. I was introduced to some individuals who uh, told me a lot about what was actually going on in Russia underneath everything, and it formed a belief that I had that uh, soon there would be war in Europe over Ukraine.
That's amazing. I didn't realize that you were in Ukraine since 2008 and you've been preparing for the war with Russia since before our politicians seem to have. I wish they had the same attitude as you did. Maybe you would be in a better position right now. Well,
Mm.
so since we're talking about preparing for the war and and everything that's been happening, I guess one of the hottest topics is Trump and Kamala's election, right? And while I was in DC last week, and I was actually at Action Ukraine Summit, and I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of non-MAGA Republican representatives, and they all seem to wait uh, looking forward to Trump not joining the office. But then there is also that caucus of people who are very extremely in waiting for Trump to become president again. And if he does, it does seem like on multiple occasions he said that he would stop aid to Ukraine because, well, he doesn't necessarily publicly say that. He says he will end the war, but if we look back into his conversations, it's very evidently how he's planning on ending the war. And there is a precedent to that in 1975 when Nixon took out the troops from Vietnam and sort of and uh, and made a big. I personally think a big sort of situation there. So, what do you think is going to happen if Trump takes the aid away from Ukraine?
Is that to you,
Well,
Paul?
if
Both.
Trump does take away the aid from Ukraine, um, Europe could either do one of two things. Either Europe can draw back its aid in preparation for what Russia's going to do to Europe, or they might double or triple down and increase um, aid going into Ukraine. They might also allow Ukraine to use things like the Storm Shadow, or if Germany gives the Taurus, to be able to strike into Russia. Um, when we get to that point, there's long range strikes. I mean, it's more important that we disable Russia's ability to execute this war on Russian soil as well, instead of just allowing the just constantly getting aid from the United States or constantly getting aid from its partners in order to just fight Russia on Ukrainian soil. So
Yeah.
there could be that. Also, another thing that I think I should point out, um, it was the Trump administration was the one that first authorized lethal aid to Ukraine in 2018. However, the people that were surrounding Trump at that time have all said that they're no longer going to work in the new Trump administration. So the people that Trump's probably going to be filling within his new administration um, are those radicalized right wing MAGA personalities that are buying into the Kool-Aid and are probably not going to be more acceptive of allowing Ukraine to receive the aid that it has been getting.
Well, I actually am so glad that you pointed that out, because I do see a lot of people, when this conversation happens, where it's very evident these days in 2024 that the Democratic Party is a lot more hawkish, like we can call it that, a lot more hawkish on Russia than Republicans ever will be. People always draw back to Trump and giving Ukraine lethal aid. In 2018, I believe that happened, and it's interesting because the Republican Party is not what it was when Trump
Mhm.
first took presidency, and the Democratic Party is not what it was when Trump first took presidency. If we think about it, it was always the Republicans who were supporting wars and who were giving lethal aid, and the Democrats who were kind of like pro-peace people who were trying to mend conflicts with thoughts and prayers. And now it's sort of the other way around, where if we stop the aid, Russia is going to get stronger, and Ukraine is not going to survive. And it does seem like the Trump administration is quite pro-Russian at this point. So, Greg, maybe you have some commentary on that.
Well, I think it's interesting, and I appreciate you, Yulia, because you're actually sharing spot on truth. And the reality is, here in the United States right now, there is no way to absolutely predict who will become the next president of the United States. And yes, we can analyze what we think Trump will do. It was just 48 hours ago, Zelensky coming out on a Fox News conservative uh, interview and stating, we had our statements after our chat in New York City at Trump Tower, but the reality is Donald Trump told me directly that he will continue supporting Ukraine. Now, these are all talking points. The bottom line is right now, I think that the world is going to be in such chaos leading up to November and the election in the United States. We're seeing what happened in the Austrian election with the Austrian Freedom Party with Kickel, and we see that the dominoes are starting to fall and affect other nations as well, such as Italy, the Netherlands, and France. And of course, the big elephant in the room is the American election, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. What's going to happen? Have no idea. Will Donald Trump, if he wins, support Ukraine? Never. Never, to the point that is necessary for them to continue the battle at the level we are doing and increase it. It's not going to happen. He can say whatever he wants. He will say whatever is necessary right now to win the election. If we want to be fair, that's why Kamala Harris jumped on an airplane and went to the border, because she will do whatever is necessary right now to win the election. So, to be completely honest and fair, Paul is here living in Ukraine. I've given 26 years of my life. I was just under glide bombs 2 weeks ago. We give our bodies and souls for this. But if anyone thinks they can predict anything before the November elections and the other elections and political movements that are happening inside Europe, it's you would be a charlatan or Nostradamus if you nail it. That's just all that's to it. And it's really frustrating. So what can we do? We can keep the pressure up. We can continue to communicate to our elected officials, and the grassroots effort around the world, much like we're doing right now at Red Lines, can continue to tell the truth. I will always stand by Peter Pavel. Peter Pavel is the president of the Czech Republic. 20 months ago, I played a video on one of my live streams, and at that time, my channel had not grown to the level it has, nor our aid had moved to the level that it has. It has just exploded over the last 12 months. But I found this video and I played it. And Peter Pavel, first of all, political experience as the president of the Czech Republic, military experience as the NATO general. He has a good, solid worldview. He is pro-Ukraine. He stated point blank, Ukraine has until November 2024. This was spring 2023, until November 2024, because up until that point, we can predict, we can push, we can analyze, we can call on nations to support. But when it comes to the election season, and he was very clear, not only in the United States, but additionally throughout European nations, the world at that point will be teeter-tottering. And how it falls will determine how the world stands going forward with Ukraine. And the man is proving to be very accurate in his prediction.
Well, he is pretty accurate. I mean, even looking at the media, every time there is an election season, I'm now seeing again the peace talks narratives and all of the world publications basically being like, oh, well, Ukraine should just, be realistic about their goals in the war. And it's very Russian narratives because, of course, not only is Russia investing in elections, Russia is a huge conglomerate of propaganda. And we are used to seeing it as consumers. I guess not we, but consumers of this propaganda are used to seeing it as bots and trolls online, but it's not just bots, it's Russia paying for Indian publications, for Pakistani publications, for publications from random countries to sort of start these narratives of, oh, an anonymous politician said this, and then New York Times picks it up, the WAPO picks it up, the Telegraph picks it up, and then here we have an explosion of, Ukraine needs to surrender, basically, all around the media during the election season. And if someone thinks that doesn't influence any opinions, then they're just naive, because it's creating a bubble, and it's creating a bubble of thinking, especially the people who are electing these politicians, right? They're reading the news and they're like, well, Ukraine is in a kind of in a stage where they need to give in anyway, so might as well just vote for someone else who's going to end this or something like that. As to Trump and Kamala, of course, they're doing everything to win the election. But I think the issue with Trump particularly is that he might tell Zelensky that he's going to be, continuing aid to Ukraine, but half of his politicians have hammers and sickles and Putin's portraits in their offices. And we've seen that throughout various different interviews of and quite popular American YouTubers, and you can't really, you can't, he hires these people, he puts them in office, he rallies behind them. So it's pretty evident to me that there is a lot of Russian influence behind it. So no matter what he says and no matter where he goes, I don't think Donald Trump is going to be good for Ukraine. I think he's going to do exactly what not even his electorate wants him to do, but what Putin wants him to do. And
well, I will just conclude with this and then throw it back to you or Paul.
mm-hmm.
You have to look, when you look at a person, whether it's a presidential candidate or somebody running for mayor of a small town, or maybe somebody you're wanting to hire to work with you. It doesn't matter. You have to look at levels of their interest and levels of their care. And we can safely say, take away propaganda, take away the internal policies in America that is causing us to be a divided nation right now, and we are divided.
Very much.
Does Donald Trump, in the core of his heart, care enough about the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian culture, the Ukrainian borders, the Ukrainian future, to invest at a level that will put him out there having to face rhetoric and condemnation from his side? My answer to that is most likely no. It has been obvious that in his pecking order of valued line items, Ukraine is definitely not at the top.
Well, before I pass it to Paul, I will say one thing that'll take less than a minute is that if you look at it, Kamala has visited Ukraine as VP, and Donald Trump has declined every single invitation that has been extended to him. So there is your answer.
Well, it's not, when you were saying just Ukraine border, Ukraine security and stuff, it's not even just over Ukraine security, it's all of Europe security. Because, before Sweden joined NATO, there was Russian war plans to annex that island that's in between off the coast of Kaliningrad that's controlled by Sweden. There was, Russian war games for the Baltics. How fast could they speed run going to the coast from Belarus and then cutting off the gap between Poland and the Balkans? So uh, there has been these uh, tells that Putin has been putting out there, and it's kind of the same way with the Trump administration, where he will say, "Oh well, I will end this war tomorrow." Same reason he's like, "Oh, we will repeal and make better Obamacare," back during his first term. So there's those aspects of the Republican Party that, or his view of the Republican Party, that we're going to have to look at. But then to go back to your point before, um, if Russia was realistic, then they wouldn't have even invaded in the first place. I was out in Ukraine twice in 2010, once before the Ukrainian elections and once after the Ukrainian elections. And it was while I was out there in 2010 that I had made the decision that I was going to have to start moving some equipment into Ukraine, because every person that I had met um, was very, "Oh, why do you want to live in Ukraine? Why don't you, I want to go live out of Ukraine. I want to live in Europe. I want to live in the United States." Because, and it's always down to the political figures that were in control of Ukraine at that time. And I understood that, you know, it was going to be a very, the next president of Ukraine was going to be a pro-Russian candidate or president, because what had happened in the 2005 election in Ukraine was really telling on what was going to happen in 2010. And then I had figured that we had until 2015 when things were going to get bad in Ukraine. Um, uh, 2013, November, December 2013, it did not surprise me. It didn't take me by shock. Like, it was like it was sudden. It happened before it was expected, but it was understood that that there was this burning resentment in the population below, um, underneath, that Putin just ignored. And if he was realistic about everything, he would have realized that the Ukrainians would have fought tooth and nail, when he came into Ukraine.
I
Um,
would suggest, to further accentuate what you're saying there, Paul, you're looking at the Ukrainian presidency, you're looking at the history, and thank you for that, man. You know your stuff. So I appreciate another American understanding the complexity of Ukrainian politics and sharing about it. Thank you for that. Last night, I played a game of Monopoly with my children and my mother-in-law and my wife. And the game of Monopoly in my home is forbidden by my wife. We've been married 31 years because I become an evil dictator when I play Monopoly. So my mother-in-law, 81, my children, my wife, all around the Monopoly table. And my wife goes to my kids. They've never played Monopoly with me. It literally is banned in my house for me to play. Kids, Meemaw, don't do it. Don't do it. He will turn into an evil human being. The game started. For the first few hours, I was down to very little money, but I was collecting territory. And I was collecting territory. And I was gambling that I would get one hit from one of those four who would hit my spot, and then the money would start to roll. It happened. And I'm just sitting there. And for the first couple of hours, my kids are saying, "Dad, we're going to destroy you. Dad, we're going to destroy you." My mother-in-law is laughing at me. "I thought you were good at this game." In 30 minutes, I owned everything, including the bank, the table, their cars. They were trying to give me their lunch money. It was over. Why do I tell that story? Because my wife knew I was feeding them the narrative. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just silent. I never opened my mouth, and I let them just talk. Right now, when you hear someone who was a presidential candidate for the United States and has a significant chance to win, let's call it the way it is, when he states that Vladimir Putin is my friend and states it directly to the president of the country that is being invaded, and while he is stating that, missiles are dropping on Pavlograd, artillery is dropping on Pokrovsk, Kryvyi Rih, and Sumy, Kharkiv. During that same window of time, I did a piece about that. While he was saying that, missiles are dropping and civilians were being killed. You are now falling into the trap that you think you are in control, and you have this narrative that you can push out. But in reality, there is a game, and I hate to refer this as a game because I've lost many, many friends. It's not a game. But for this statement, there is a game being played. And unfortunately, Donald Trump looks at this game in a 24-hour window, in a 36-month window, in a 5-year window at the max. If I'm elected, even before I take office, I will end this war in 24 hours. I will bring peace to the situation, to the war, and there will be no more killing. We will do what is necessary, and it will be a just ending for both parties. Sir, you have already taken up residence at Putin's table inside the Kremlin, and you are smashing his narrative for him, and you don't even know it. Last night, my kids won the game for me and didn't even know it. I was just playing them, just playing them. And I unfortunately feel, and I think we all see it, a lot of that is happening not only in the United States, but now we're seeing it throughout Europe, where these narratives continuing to be pushed. I remind you guys of the 4 stages of ideological subversion with Yuri Bezmenov. He was telling the world this. His famous interview happened in 1984. Russia has been planning for this for decades and decades. And the world's viewpoint is, what happened in the last 4 or 5 years? No. This is why we must take a view. That's why I will always go back to Peter Pavel. Peter Pavel is even saying, you guys don't get it. This has been happening for decades. So I'm hoping and believing that as we, grassroots efforts, continue to push truth to the best of our ability and the reality of the narrative that is truth and not propaganda, hopefully it gets into the right places where the people who have serious decision-making power can start to stand up for it and stand up for what's right, which of course is Ukraine here.
Well, I find it, I find it very what you said very interesting. I think the biggest issue here is that, people usually don't tend to understand or get it unless they have been to Ukraine. And if they haven't, the majority of the people haven't and won't go to Ukraine. Americans, especially Americans, we have a hard time traveling. The United States is a very large country to begin with. But so I was talking to Don Bacon, who is a congressman, and he's a very Republican, but very pro-Ukrainian. There is a Russian worship "Go F Yourself" thing in front of his office. It's a very nice poster. Well, it skips the Russian worship part. It just says "Go F Yourself" in Ukrainian, and it's a Ukrainian flag. And he went to Ukraine and he said, "I get it now." He supported Ukraine from the very beginning, but at the same time, I don't think it was as staunchly as after he visited. The issue is that we don't tend to care about things that we don't see personally. So once you go, you start understanding. Once you start talking to people in Ukraine, you start understanding that we're not just idiots who are fed propaganda and that's why we think Russia is bad. We actually know what we're talking about. And the issue that we're experiencing on the internet, right? It's almost as if the second that you went to Ukraine, you stopped being an American. You started being a person influenced by Ukraine who doesn't know what you're talking about. And your time in Ukraine is now playing against you, not for you and for your knowledge. Because the majority of the people, A, will never go and will, especially those that don't support Ukraine, they will look at it as, oh, you got brainwashed while you went to this country. And it's like, no, I did not get brainwashed. I just spoke to people who live in that country and I've, in my own eyes, seen that they know what they have gone through and they know what Russia is and they know the threat that Russia is. which also brings me to the point that I don't think I guess Europeans are starting to get it now, but Americans are still so far away from it. It's not about letting Ukraine win for America, right? Because if we drop all of the like people are dying and we care about people, in reality, that doesn't do anything to America and an average American, right? But it's about making Russia lose because Ukraine is not a problem for the United States. It would be a great addition once Ukraine is recovering, right? It's a great ally, but it's also like you're not winning or losing anything, right? But with Russia, you are losing a lot if you are letting Russia win because Russia has been since the Cold War and since the Soviet Union, since well, way back when, a big adversary of the United States because Russia is an imperial nation. And while, yes, there are people who keep saying America is an imperial nation too, but it's like American imperialism is kind of modernized to 2024, and we are sort of living with something that we have done way back when, right? We're not conquering new countries, we're not trying to take new territory. Russia is an old school imperial power that genuinely wants to be the Russian Empire. And the only thing standing in the way of that is the Western world at the head with the United States. So if anyone should be scared of Russia, it's the US because the US is the biggest threat to Russia and Russia's plans. And while obviously Russia is likely never going to bring tanks into the US, tanks don't have to be rolling through the US for Russia to invade it because again, we're seeing hammers and sickles in American official elected officials' offices. If that's not an invasion, I don't know what is. Ideological invasion.
Yeah. One of the things that like a lot of people, well, first off, I kind of see Putin now as the South Park movie version of Saddam,
Yeah.
where like he'll do something bad, and then you'll be like, come on, man. And then you're like, oh, okay, everything's fine. And then he does something bad again. And that's what's going to be happening here in Europe and in the United States after the war in Ukraine, if Putin is allowed to win or at least achieve the majority of his goals.
Mm.
So when a lot of Americans who don't get to see that, they don't care about the death tolls, because when you hear that X amount of civilians have been killed so far in Ukraine, unless you are as an American directly connected to that person in some way, it's just another news feed, another news story on your feed, and you're just swiping down, to the next thing. And that was a problem I had, in America while being here, even before all this trouble with between Russia and Ukraine had even really first materialized. So when I talked to a lot of Americans out here, when I was at DC as well this past week. This was my third Ukrainian Action Summit, and I was able to one particular congressman. He actually, the first meeting I did with him was my first Action Summit, and he accidentally just walked into the meeting, like not understanding that, oh, we're meeting with his aide. And then he sat down and we kind of discussed stuff, and his opinion of Ukraine had changed, because while I was sitting there, I was actually an American vet. Um,
Mm.
a family member of mine lived in his district, so he and I were discussing things, because I've been to his district plenty of times, and we were discussing things and bonding over that, and that had actually really shifted his thought of, he was towing the Trump line regarding, what foreign policy should be for America, and he wanted nothing to do with Ukraine. However, we were able and lucky enough to get an interview with his aide, and when he walked in, it was really, able to solidify my personal stories, which then just brought that meaning home for him, and
Yeah.
allowed him to uh, view it more broad, um, a more positive light towards Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely. It's sort of like we only care about the things that affect us, right? And that's just human nature. And one of the reasons why I sort of quit my job and started doing what I'm doing, because I was a UX designer before I started doing political commentary, is because, and I fully understand this, I'm very palatable for an average American because while I'm Ukrainian and I was born and raised there, I sound incredibly American. And I've also lived here for a very long time. And so for someone who is watching the news about Ukraine, it's obviously a lot easier to understand me and listen to me than it would be to someone who appears very Ukrainian and has like an accent and stuff. And this is just reality, right? I wish it was different, but it's reality, and it's for everyone like that. It's the same as it's easier for me to listen to someone who speaks Ukrainian very well than an American who's trying to speak Ukrainian. It's very nice. I appreciate it, but sometimes it's hard to understand, and the vocabulary is different. So that's why I do what I do, because I fully understand that I have a position of power in that way, where I'm incredibly, not even a position of power, but a position of privilege. I'm very Ukrainianized, but I'm also incredibly Americanized. And I'm trying to make that bridge. And so it's very helpful when there are people like you and there are people like Greg who have been to Ukraine, who completely understand the Ukrainian context and then talk about it, because I think that that does, especially for our leaders and for Congress people, I think it really does make a difference. I will even give an example. We were meeting with a senator. I won't say who he is, but he was in the National Guard, and I was there with Bill, who's an incredible Ukrainian advocate. He's also American. He's from California, and I was also there with Wikipedia. It's his call sign. He's an Azov fighter who was in Mariupol, was in Azovstal, went through Russian captivity. He now uses a bionic prosthetic for his leg. And he speaks English pretty decently. So I really wanted him to come and sort of talk to our elected leaders with us, because I thought it would make an impact. Now, a lot of people don't know what branch of the military Azov is. So when you talk to a senator or to a congressman and you just say, "Hey, I'm a former fighter of Azov," they think of like, "Oh, okay, hero because Mariupol and Azovstal," but they never think National Guard. So this particular senator, he served in the National Guard. So I made that connection to him and my friend Wikipedia, because I was like, you both served in the same branch of the military. And that conversation changed immediately, because now they have something that they both went through, they bonded over. And I believe that that conversation would have gone well, but would not have gone nearly as well had they not shared this. So I guess our best strategy is to look for commonalities between your average American and your average Ukrainian, and with everyone that we talk to about these situations, to make them feel for it much more than they do currently.
It's one
Well,
of the.
one thing that I
Go
sorry,
ahead.
let
No,
me
go ahead.
just real quickly off of that. One thing that I try to do when I talk to individuals, especially I'm a Republican.
Mhm.
Um, my entire family is Republican, and about half of them are kind of MAGA supporting Republicans. The other half are, your traditional Republicans, pre-Trump
Yeah.
Republicans, your Bush and your Reagan Republicans. So when I talk to other individuals, other friends of mine who are Republicans, one of the things that I try to do and try to draw first off is this is Ukrainians' fight against a tyrannical government, which is a huge point for a lot of us Republicans here who feel that, you know, if we have a democratic president, that it's going to go into this tyrannical. They want to control everything and run everything, and if we had those friends of mine who have been against Ukraine see that Ukraine is fighting that fight that they want to fight, that they're fighting an overreaching, overbearing, tyrannical government who wants to control and restrict their freedoms, then it's a much easier entryway for me to talk to these guys about a lot of this stuff. And I've been able to get some of my friends and some of my um, previous acquaintances to understand how important it is to continue to support Ukraine simply on just that fact alone. And when I talk to them, they know nothing about Russia, they know nothing about Ukraine, but they see what they're being fed by either their talking heads online or through their news media saying, oh, well, U.S. shouldn't be involved in Ukraine. We should get out. Um, it's actually the opposite. We should be doing more to support Ukraine for their fight of freedom and their rights to live the way that they want to live, and not how some government is forcing them to live. So
Well, I
sorry
think
about that, Greg.
Oh, no
no.
problem. No
Do you
problem.
mind if
No,
I
go
add
ahead.
something?
Sure.
So what I was going to say is that it probably again comes back to two precedents, which is Nixon pulling troops out of Vietnam, right, and Trump. Well, I guess that one is contested, right? But Trump signing the deal to pull troops out of Afghanistan, right? Both of these countries were overtaken by fascist regimes. The second that happened, but that doesn't affect Americans in any way other than reading horrendous news, right? Like our everyday lives here in America didn't change because of that in the bigger picture. But if we think of
Well,
what's going to happen to Ukraine if something like that happens, well, we don't have troops, but we have support. It's going to be a very different situation.
Go ahead. I know you wanted to answer, so go.
okay, so like I'm a Afghan vet. I served in Afghanistan 2011 to 2012. I was in the Kandahar area, and it was hard for me to see the pullout. A lot of my personal political beliefs, I believe, it's absolutely wrong how the Biden administration pulled out. There was a need to end that war in Afghanistan. I was in Afghanistan when the Iraq war came to a close, and after we pulled out the majority of U.S. troops in Iraq, then we had ISIS, backfill that power vacuum that had happened when we left. So even pulling out of Iraq was a huge issue for the order of Iraq and what we spent a decade doing in Iraq. So there's no right answer in pulling out support without stabilizing that region to a point in where we wouldn't have to worry about that. But then there's so many other political uh, uh, trying to think of the perfect word, but a lot of political, not blowback, but just
Fallout.
issues with, how long are we going to be there? When, we switched from a Bush administration to an Obama administration, there were a lot of different ways on how either party had addressed the wars before. So if we do cut support to Ukraine, it's going to be a absolute devastating loss to not just Ukraine but also to Europe. And sorry, my train of thought got derailed a little bit there for
No,
a second. So
I feel you. I
I
mean,
mean,
politically, I'm a Democrat, but I will say that Obama's administration was probably one of the biggest disasters in terms of international geopolitics I have ever seen.
yeah,
And I do blame a lot of Ukraine's issues on Obama because of his very, very, very lacking reaction. But I do also understand as a political reporter and commentator that I guess he authorized a drone strike before everything broke out in Ukraine, and that drone strike came to bite him very, very deeply. And once the situation in Ukraine broke out, I guess Obama's response was, "Up, I don't want to screw up again, so let's just be very, very careful on this." But he doesn't. I'm sure now he knows what an avalanche of just terrible stuff he started by doing that, by trying to play it very, very safe that time.
Paul,
But I
thank you
guess
for your service.
I appreciate that, Greg.
And I would also
One
tell you
thing,
this will be one of the very few pro-Ukrainian support channels where two of us in here, including Yulia with her background being Ukrainian American, um, two of us Ronald Reaganite conservative Republicans are smashing for the support of Ukraine and leading by example. We're destroying the narrative that
mhm,
Republicans hate Ukraine. What a bunch of bull hockey. MAGA has destroyed the narrative. I would say this, and then I'll let you go. I don't mean to interrupt you, but to bring it full circle, you're speaking about Vietnam. Okay, my uncle was in Vietnam. I know it very well. You're speaking about Afghanistan, but for me personally, I don't think those are apples to apples comparisons, and nor um, the principle there is proper. But the bottom line is we do not have boots on the ground in Ukraine. We had boots on the ground in Vietnam. We had boots on the ground in Afghanistan. We had billions of dollars worth of equipment in Vietnam. We had billions of dollars worth of equipment in Afghanistan. So we can't compare that. We can compare it principally, but in reality, we're talking about a completely different set of circumstances here with Ukraine. We do not even have boots on the ground, and we're able to fight a war proxy, let's just shoot it straight, proxy through Ukraine, where Ukrainians are saying, give us support, give us supply, give us training. We will risk our sons and
Most inconvenient time to freeze.
Yeah, the most inconvenient time to freeze. I was wondering if it was me, maybe, but it seems like it's Greg.
Give him a second.
Yeah.
oh,
Oh, Greg, you're
yeah.
back, but you froze on the most inconvenient time. I will catch you up on where you froze. We'll use our sons and daughters.
Yeah, we'll use our sons and daughters. We will fight for freedom. We know how to fight Russia. In fact, I can bring that right back to what Vladimir Zelensky said this past weekend in the United States in his interviews. With all due respect, and I'm basically quoting him, with all due respect, you in the West, in the United States specifically, you may think you understand Vladimir Putin. You may think you understand the Kremlin, but the reality is you do not know how to fight against the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin, and this propaganda machine. We as Ukrainians do know how. So please help us, and we will fight the fight for
For you. Well, so
And
while
he
Greg
froze again.
Yeah, while Greg is freezing again, what I will say while we're waiting for him to unfreeze is what I always say is, the United States and other Ukrainian allies have all the means to fight Russia, but don't know how to. Ukraine has no means to fight Russia, but knows exactly how to. And we need to start collaborating a little more on in that regard, because Ukraine, we have all of the knowledge and you have all of the means. Why aren't we not combining it efficiently?
Well, one thing
well,
that I wanted to add back to your Obama statements was
Mhm.
that during the Obama administration and during the Russian soft invasion of Ukraine back in 2014, we
Yeah.
did have the ISIS issue to address, and
Yeah.
there were information that I had been told, and I can't verify it, but it does seem plausible to me that Obama had a much softer hand with Ukraine simply because he wanted more cooperation with Russia in Syria than he would have gotten if he just started sending out to Ukraine lethal aid and allowing Ukraine to build up and then train. Imagine what Ukraine would be right now if in
Yeah.
2016 they were getting pilots trained on the F-16, if they were getting uh, tank crews trained on Western tanks and maintenance personnel trained on maintaining these vehicles, as well as uh, a NCO corps being developed in Ukraine for a more modern Western Ukrainian military. Putin would have made Obama's job in Syria that much harder without any cooperation. And then at the same time, you see really how I just froze a little bit there, didn't I?
I don't know.
But you will
I don't.
see how Obama's a lot of Obama's choices towards supporting Ukraine was really based on which evils he would wanted to address first, either the ones in Syria with ISIS, because
Yeah.
he didn't want to put troops back into the Middle East, and that was his huge driving force. But then at the same time, this really played into Putin's game of allowing Putin to do stuff that he wanted to do in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and then down in Africa with basically with impunity, which allows him to build this sense of self where he can do this and then he's going to get away with it. And then this is a very dangerous mindset that he has, because he's going to go into the Balkans, he's going to go into Poland. He's already preparing his population through his media and propaganda, saying, "Oh, look, the Polish, they hate you, they want to kill you, they're coming for you," and he's riling up his population. And then at the same time, going into Western nations like the United States and Europe with his propaganda machines, and then saying like, "Oh, we don't need to support Ukraine. Ukraine is full of Nazis and it's full of, you know, people who hate democracy and they want to see the world burn." And it's
Yeah.
just what's going on in this time now.
That
Well, it's
narrative, that narrative, excuse me, Yulia, that narrative does work though.
it
We don't agree with it, but it works. If we take it back to 1956, Nikita Khrushchev stated, "We will take the United States from within without ever firing a shot." And I know people want to look at that and say, You're clueless, dude. That's just history." Well, take a look at
that's
what's
what's
happening
happening.
now. Take a look at what's happening now, all these 70 years later. I will say this: when the full scale war unfolded, I went into Ukraine for my first time. I had some friends here in the United States that in a military security unit. Um,
Oh no. Oh no. It's always on the best stories too.
Yeah, it is. It's Russian hackers.
I know, right?
They're suppressing the truth.
did I know you got to edit this, but I don't know where the internet issue's coming from. It's somewhere out there. Like mine's smoking, so it's somewhere out there. I'm
we
checking
were just
every
joking.
time.
We were
Do
just
what?
joking that it's Russian hackers, you know. They've
Yeah, because I can see my network connections over here, and it's perfect. So something's going on.
yeah, mine
Um,
seems to be good too. Weird.
it's weird, but I will say this: when I came for my first run to evacuate civilians, drop some medical aid, and help really early in the war, I have some friends. They're based in Georgia, and veterans of the Iraqi war. He now started a private security.
Mm. Oh no.
Hmm.
Mm.
At least it's not as unflattering as the first frozen time, the
I
face
wonder
and
if
the
it's
Yeah,
StreamYard
I don't know.
because I don't know.
Maybe try
hmm.
dropping off and coming back with the same link. Maybe that'll help.
Hmm. Okay, let's do that. Leave studio.
Because you know, I want to hear the story.
Yeah, I do too. Uh, so on my first trip after the full scale invasion, very early in the war, I came dropping aid, evacuating civilians, just at the very initial stages, trying to figure out what we can do to help. And I had a friend down in Georgia who owns a security company. It's full of American veterans who actually the one that I became in relationship with was an American veteran from Desert Storm. That company now runs private security for United States senators, House of Representatives members. And he called me. I've known this guy that owns the company a long time. He says, Greg, I see on YouTube you're going to go to Ukraine. He goes, what
Mhm.
experience do you have? I said, in Ukraine, a lot. Military and war, zero, other than my grandfather being a decorated World War II veteran. He says, man, let me send a security guy with you. My dime, my everything. He'll meet with you. We met in the state of Virginia, went over the trip. I was going for a 6-week run
Mhm.
and took the guy there. He is a MAGA Republican. And it was so interesting when we went in. He says, Greg, we became friends. He says, Greg, I'm here to make sure you come back alive, even if I do not. That's what our company does. And when we get into close line situations, we're going to be evacuating civilians. We're definitely going to see some military things happen. Listen to me, and I'll take care of you. So we get in the Ukraine, we're running around, and we get over towards Eastern Ukraine. And for me, I'm running around with my soldiers and commanders that I've been friends with for 20 years that are now commanders in so many different brigades and battalions and platoon commanders. I trust these guys with my life. And we got over into some sticky situation. And as we were rolling in, he asked this question of my partner and I, Zhenya. He says, can you guys show me a biolab? This was serious. I said, a biolab? He goes, I know they're here. I know they're here and I want to see one. I said, well, I can take you to a pharmacy, an
Mhm.
ABPEC, and get you some saline solution. No biolabs. They have to be here. I said, they're not. He goes, I know my sources.
Mhm.
So, well, you're in my country now, and now I'm your source. There's
Mhm.
none here. And he goes, okay, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my sources are wrong. We run the front line for a few weeks. The first cruise missile that goes over our head, we were way over east beside Bakhmut.
Mhm.
And the dude looks up. He goes, I'm leaving. I said, what do you mean you're leaving?
Mhm.
Okay, I can deal with artillery and I can deal with AKs and I can deal with drone work, but I'm not staying around cruise missiles. And the guy left the country. We put him on a bus back to Lviv, back to Europe, and he went home. He made it 3 out of 6 weeks. But before he left, this is what he said. Greg, I really honor what you do. And to be honest with you, you're much more courageous than I am. And I am a veteran and I defend senators. So I have utmost respect for you and Jania. And I can see that the guys you run with know exactly what they're doing. You're
Well, we got a lot more out of this now, but I will add to that, I guess, while Greg is frozen, that's the experience of a lot of veterans that came in the first weeks of the invasion, who were used to fighting in Afghanistan with a lot more NATO support and a lot more organized military, and then they came here and they were like, "Oh, so this
I
is
know
just
exactly where I
military."
was. I know exactly where I was. Because I know you're in good hands, so I'm going to leave you here with all respect, to what you do. But I want you to know that I've learned a lot while I'm here. And everything that I've seen points me to the fact that possibly Ukraine is fighting a just war. I will go home and think about it. I will go home and consider it. But right now, I still sit on the fence because I do not know whom to believe. I tell you that story to tell you this. He's still on the fence. And if anything, he's leaning toward MAGA and the Russian narrative.
Of course, it's kind of like, grandmas in occupied territories or grandmas in Russia. Like you can tell them the truth. They'll see it, they'll hear it, they'll kind of be enlightened for what a day, and then the second they turn Russian TV back on, it's regression to day one. So that's kind of
Mhm.
that's kind of how propaganda works, and it's crazy, but it is what it is. But I do want to tell you that you should have taken him to a biolab. I keep telling Americans that they live next to biolabs. There is like 20 of them in my neighborhood. It's like if you want to get blood work done, you send it to a biolaboratory. So, you yourself can always go and get your allergy tests. I don't know, get checked for STDs. All of that is done in a biolaboratory. I can personally recommend, these quick care, fast care, whatever facilities that are all around every state. They're called in different ways, but they're urgent cares. And yeah, you can go check out a biolab by
Well,
yourself. We do
the
have those in
bottom the bottom line is this:
Ukraine.
we can actually even take people to the front and have them experience it.
Mhm.
It just shows you the grip of a narrative that has been in action for decades and decades and decades. So what we're doing here is we're combating that. And we have to understand reality. I fully stand in support for Ukraine and the victory of Ukraine and fighting for the West, fighting for my children, fighting for our future, fighting for global stability, all of that. But if we think that one little Rammstein meeting or one presidential election or this narrative from this expert is going to change anything overnight, it's not
It's
going to
not.
happen. This is a long game play. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And that's why I'm very appreciative of you, Yulia, and I'm appreciative of Paul and others that we are fighting for truth. And if we don't give up, if we keep going one by one, we'll clip it off. We'll clip it off. We'll clip it off. And that's what we can do to change the narrative. And in changing the narrative, the support that Ukraine desperately needs will come, and it will be overwhelming. And you talk about red lines. Let's push the red line. Let's push it. That's how I view it. You want to talk red lines, Mr. Putin? And if this happens, I'm going to consider nuclear and Lavrov in New York. Remember, we're a nuclear nation. My answer would have been, if I was the president, you need to remember that we're nuclear. And if you even mention that word again, we will smash you. It's over then, because we need that type of discourse from leaders. And secondly, what we're doing to battle against the propaganda. And from that, I believe victory can and will come for Ukraine.
I agree with that. And I love that, this very, very powerful statement ended with Greg freezing again, because it would not be this stream if that didn't happen, or this
Yeah.
recording if that didn't happen. But we are sort of running. It's a great conclusion, because I do want to say, I think, I would say, so here's what we're gonna do. Greg said a very great quote. I'm gonna say a quote, and then you're gonna say a quote. Sorry, gonna have to.
I'm
Something.
I'm here, Yulia. I got a lot of gear going over here, and
Yeah.
I promise you, my internet is perfect. I'm running through my studio setup right now. Everything is perfect. So I don't know what's going on. I think we're sharing so much truth that they're
Yeah.
fighting us right now.
Hey, I believe you. I
I
mean,
lost
listen.
you again.
Oh no. Well, I do believe, Greg, because my internet in Ukraine is much better than Spectrum over here, which, if you're watching this, please do something with your connection in Brooklyn, because it's always awful. But what I do want to say is that, we always think about Russia's red lines and what Russia is going to be upset about and what Russia is not going to be upset about, and how we have to tiptoe around Russia. But like, we are the United States of America. We're one of the most powerful countries in the world militarily.
The
Why
most
are we not
powerful
making
country militarily.
Thank you. Why are
Yeah.
we not thinking about why are we not making Russia fear our red lines, and not even red lines, but pink lines and orange lines and whatever, gray lines and things that why is Russia not scared of making steps forward that could potentially piss us off? Because if we look at it from a standpoint of literally everything, we are much stronger than Russia in every regard, economically, militarily, every regard. Why are we so
Well,
scared of Russia?
I'm gonna say my quote right now, and it's the "Speak softly but carry a big stick." Uh, United States keeps speaking softly to these dictators, and it's not until stuff like Saddam Hussein in Iraq or uh, the Taliban in Afghanistan and Al Qaeda in Afghanistan do they experience the stick. And Wagner, back in Syria, they experienced the stick. But Russia itself hasn't really experienced getting hit with this big stick yet. And it kind of segues into one of the other points where we were going to discuss is allowing Ukraine to use these long range fires to take out military targets in Russia, right? So buddies of mine, they're currently having vacation in Kursk at the moment, and Ukraine has crossed every red line that Russia has put forward. And then when I was in DC this past week, I wanted to let the congressmen and senators really push the Biden administration in order to allow us to use long range fires against valid Russian targets on Russian soil. And that's really the only way that this war is going to end. Every time that I go out there to get money for military aid, it's like I need this money to get this rocket launcher to destroy this tank. I'm going to come back in a little bit because I'm going to need another rocket launcher to destroy another tank. So we need to get that rocket, and use that rocket to destroy the tank factory, to destroy the railhead that is transiting these military supplies into Ukraine. We needed these rockets, these long range munitions to take out the hardened ammo supply depots, right? So Ukraine's done really great at taking out the ones where they're outside on the ground, but Russia's not going to make that same mistake twice. They're going to start hardening their ammo supply depots. We need to take out these airstrips launching that are launching the jets that are dropping these glide bombs. So until Russia experiences that stick, they're not going to take anything that we say seriously. And you see it in the faces when they capture Western equipment. The United States and her allies have been giving Ukraine equipment that dates back into the early 90s and 80s and stuff. And we had actually ended up capturing a BMD-2 that had a stamp on it that was made in 1983. And that tank itself, you could have mistaken it for something that was made in World War II with the optical sights that it had. It had no electronics inside of it whatsoever, other than running the basic electrical components, the same thing that you would have on a car, like your lights, the starter of the motor, the hydraulic systems for the turret. So, Russia has experienced understanding what aid the United States is sending to Ukraine. So we need to continue on with more aid to Ukraine, but also allow Ukraine to use this aid in order to bring this war to an end as quickly and as less destructive as what Russia plans to bring this war to an end with. They're currently outside of Kursk. I was stationed there most all of 2023 and in December of 22. So they're starting to level that city the same way that they had to level Bakhmut or Avdiivka.
Yeah, that's what Russia always does. But I hope that, one sec. I'm in New York, so I don't know if you hear these lovely noises, but there is always someone with a car with like very, very huge subs playing some incredibly atrocious music. But well, after this lyrical pause, thank you so much, guys, for contributing to this, to this segment, to this channel, and for sharing your thoughts with me and with everyone who's going to be watching it. I do feel like it was a great team here, and while we might not have gone over all of the questions that I guess we wanted to touch on today, I think we've done a lot more than that. I think we've given a very big insight and perspective into how this narrative around the world and the election and the war in Ukraine today is being built, and how we can combat it, and how we can make sure that we don't fall for, we don't fall for what dictators want us to fall for. So thank you so much for being here today, and thank you so much for giving me your time and our viewers your time. And I hope to see you here again.
Thank you. Look forward to it, Yulia. Paul, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Greg.
Greg. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, this was Redlines, and I hope we crossed some of yours. If you would like to hear more conversations like these with brilliant minds that have a lot to contribute to the understanding of Ukraine and Russia's aggression against it, please don't forget to subscribe to the Gaze and UATV English. In the meanwhile, also do like this video and share it with a friend. Maybe they're interested as well. And do give us a comment, because I personally read all of them, and I would love to know your opinion on everything that we've talked about. And I will see you next time, crossing some more of your red lines and hopefully setting some more fires to the internet.